guys. Welcome back to the Left of Straight Show Interviews, the premier podcast that shares the stories of our amazing LGBTQ community and, of course, fantastic straight allies, all from entertainment, foodies, books, music, and advocacy. I'm your host, as always, Scott Fullerton, and let's start talking. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm thrilled to have actor, writer, and producer Mason McCulley on the podcast with me. You may recognize Mason from his recurring role on Insecure, the hit series from Issa Rae. But today we're diving into his latest project, Carol Cook Died for My Sins, a heartfelt and humorous stage production premiering in Los Angeles this month. Mason's crafted a beautiful love letter to both Carol and his mother that documents his queer experience, celebrating life, loss, and everything in between. Carol's been such a good friend to a Late for Straight podcast family through Del Shores and our Sorted Lives family. So I'm excited to talk with Mason about his career, his creative process, and of course, the beautiful, wonderful Miss Carol Cook. But first, take a look.
I think she's dead.
May I help you?
Yes. We're here to see Pearl Goodfish. Where is the old cunt?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said we are here to see Pearl Goodfish. Where is the old cunt?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm Wincy, and this is Biz.
I'm confused. Are you two selling laundry detergent?
No, Biz would like to see me.
Get back in here, Durwood. My feet are getting cold.
Coming, madam, right away. There's someone here to see you.
Open the door. Open the door, please.
That's darling. Call me back. Yes, when the swelling goes down. But what? Durwood, what? May I help you?
Hello, Pearlie.
Biz. Oh my God. I thought you were dead. Hooray for Hollywood. That's Screwy Valley, hooey, Hollywood, where any office boy.
Hi, I'm Kim Kardashian, and I have a wonderful store named The Dash, and we get that from the name Kardashian.
When I grow up, I wanna be famous, I wanna be a star, I wanna be in movies. When I grow up, I wanna see the world, drive nice cars, I wanna have groupies. When I grow up, be on TV, people know me, be on magazines.
We lived together for a year.
And there we go. That was Mason and Carol Cook. Mason, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm exhausted. I just had rehearsal, but I'm thrilled to be here with you.
One person play. How do you do it, my friend?
I don't know. Well, I'll tell you this. I haven't done it yet. I'm in rehearsal right now, and it is the hardest thing I've ever done. It is the most exciting thing I've ever done. It is the most thrilling thing I've ever done. We have our first preview in about 10 days, and I'll let you know after that happens. I'll let you know how I do it. But I'm having a lot of fun.
Until then, lots of Starbucks and getting
exactly. Diet Coke.
There you go. Diet Coke is the way to go. Well, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Like I said, Carol has been in my periphery a lot because of the Sorted Lives family. Dell's a great friend of my show, and he tells me Carol stories all the time, so I'm sure you have a million of them. We're going to get into all of that. But let's start, since it's the first time on the show. Give me a little bit of background. Let everyone know where you grew up and what kind of a kid were you?
Sure. Okay, so I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and I was a very creative kid. I was always doing theater, and I was always painting, and I was always making puppets, and I was always dreaming of Los Angeles. And it was actually in Birmingham, Alabama, where I met Carol Cook. When I was 18, she came to do a production of Hello, Dolly. And as you know, she was the second Dolly after Carol Channing in the 60s. she reprised that role one time the summer of 2001, and I went with my mother to see it. But I was a creative kid. I was always occupied with projects. But Hollywood was like was always my dream, and so I came out here to go to Pepperdine University, study theater, and then stayed put and entered into the world of TV.
I love that. Southern boy makes good. How cool
Yes.
is that? And you're out and proud part of our LGBTQ community. Tell about when did you start coming out to yourself, and where did you start finding your LGBTQ tribe? Still in the South, or when
Oh,
you
I love
came to
these
LA?
questions. Well, I came out late. I came out at the age of 28, and I was very fortunate because I lived in Los Angeles. I lived near West Hollywood. At the time, I didn't live in West Hollywood, but I was very fortunate that I got to come out in LA. I got to come out in California. I got to come out, in the gayborhood. And to be honest, that's kind of where I found my tribe. I found my tribe in West Hollywood. I write about it in the play. As you know, there is something sacred about our queer spaces. And one thing that I learned very quickly is that there was something very sacred about the gay bars. They were not just a place to go drink. They were a place for community. They were a place to find your people. They were a place where all walks of life and all ages coexisted. And I jumped in. I jumped into West Hollywood, and I found a very safe space in West Hollywood. It got a little too safe until it got unsafe. That's in the play, so I'll save those stories. But I was very fortunate that there was such access to queer spaces in Los Angeles when I came out. And I now spend a lot of time in Alabama, and I'm getting more and more involved in a lot of the organizations and a lot of the queer organizations in Alabama in regards to fundraising and visibility. And I have such respect and admiration for, my friends that came out in the South, and especially in the Deep South. Right. It's a different journey. It's a different journey. We all have our own journey, but it's certainly a different journey in places like the South. I'm very fortunate that Birmingham, Alabama has a beautiful gay community that's growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's different coming out. It's different coming out into a place like Birmingham, Alabama. So I love that question. And I remember the Abbey. That was my safe place, and I remember my friend calls it the Country Club because that's our place where we gather. Right. But it was in those spaces that I found my people, and I found myself, really.
That's one of the most beautiful things about our communities. We do get to create our own tribe too. We kind of see who we're drawn to, and we kind of accept one another as we can. We can be just as catty as anybody else, but yes. It is definitely a community and a tribe. You mentioned Pepperdine. I absolutely love that. It's a wonderful campus. I used to go visit a couple friends there, and then they used to film Battle of the Network Stars there back in the day because I'm an old gay Mason.
No, you're not.
Talk about, and you've been a liaison there for the theater program and got a lot of really people in there. That's kind of exciting to help grow that theater community and the learning environment as well. How exciting was that to work with that?
It was wonderful. I was so grateful for Pepperdine. I studied theater there, and the reason I chose Pepperdine is because it was near LA, but it was small and conservative. So my parents were like, sure, go there. It was a wonderful theater community. I'm still very, very close with my director, Kathy Thomas Grant. And actually, the assistant director, Kayla, on our production, who's assisting Cameron Watson, is just a recent graduate from Pepperdine. I graduated in 2005, and in 2008, I came on into the theater program as the industry liaison, which was an adjunct position where essentially I got the senior acting majors for their final semester. It was their senior thesis course. And I sort of helped curate a masterclass series that helped guide them into, the professional side of acting. I didn't teach them acting. I kind of taught them about resumes and headshots and agents and casting directors and networking and managers. And it was an amazing experience. I was there for 14 years. I got 14 classes of seniors. A lot of them I'm still very close to. Jessica Rotter, she's doing the music for my play. She was a student in one of my classes. The best part about that experience was getting to know the students and watching them go on to do such interesting things. Every year there's students that are doing regional theater. There's students that find themselves doing other things creatively. We have students that are producing. That was the best part. It was so cool to somewhat mentor these kids. I mean, I was there, I was in their shoes. That was the only reason I was able to do it is because I was in their shoes. It's not that I knew much more. It was that I had learned it because I had been out and about and I came from where they came from. But the best part has been seeing what they're up to. And
Right.
there's the network from Pepperdine is growing and growing and growing.
Let's talk about Insecure. I mean, that had such a strong cultural impact. You're on that show for the first 3 seasons playing Ken. What was that like to be like a series recurring on that?
It was incredible. The timing of that show was incredible because it happened right when my mother got sick. And when I left the show in season 3, I told the producers and the writers, I said, you guys gave me such a gift. I always say I was a little part on a very big show. They gave me such a gift because it gave me something to be excited about. It gave me something to focus on. It gave me something to talk about. And it gave me a reason to wake up. And I got to work on the pilot. And then I got to do 3 seasons of it. And the coolest part is that I got to see it from the very beginning. So I got to see Issa especially rise. I mean, all these brilliant women on the show have risen to become such figures in Hollywood. And I got to be there from the beginning. It was thrilling. It still is thrilling. All of them are doing such incredible things. They've gone on to have their own TV shows. Yvonne Orji has comedy specials and more movies. And Natasha Rothwell has her own show. And she also did White Lotus. And Issa's doing a gazillion things. And to feel like I was a part of that family was such a treat. And I'm so grateful for it. Again, I was a little part on a very big show. But it was my first time coming back to a show. I typically do guest star work, and which I'm so grateful for. I pop into a really cool show and then leave. But for that show, I got to keep coming back, and it was such a treat. It was such a treat.
Absolutely amazing, groundbreaking show. I do love that. And we played the clip with you and Carol on Break a Hip. And I mean, talk about some great people on there. You had Allison Janney on, Octavia Spencer, Perry Gilpin. And now, I mean, the writer and creator is now working with you in your new show. So what a wonderful experience that had to be.
An incredible experience. Cameron Watson has been a mentor to me for over 15 years. And he's the reason Carol came back into my life. I met Carol in 2001, and around 2008, I met her again in passing. But it wasn't until Cameron asked me to narrate a screenplay he wrote, which then became Break a Hip. It was a screenplay called Lonely on the Moon. We did it at a church and in a church room just to hear it out loud. And he asked me to narrate it, and Carol was in it. And that's what brought us back together. And Cameron has been a mentor to me. He's coached me on many, many auditions, and he's really guided me through the process of not only writing this play and finding this play, but now that we're deeply into the rehearsals, he is my guide in bringing it to life. And I'm so grateful for his guidance because it has been such a journey, and it still is a journey. But it's thrilling. And we have so many parallels, Cameron and I. And I'm grateful for his friendship, and I'm grateful that he is willing to take on this project and bring it to life. He's a brilliant theater director who directs a ton of theater in Los Angeles. And for him to say yes, I called him when I was in New York, still writing the play. And I said, I've got this idea. It's an idea, but it's a really good idea. And I manically spoke to him for about 30 minutes, and he said, I will do this. I'm excited. Let's do it together. And he's really helped me find it. He's helped me find my story. Play aside, he's helped me find my story. Everything that I say on stage is true. Everything that I share happened. And it happened recently. It happened within the past 2 years. And so he's helped me dig into that journey and dig into those truths and piece together my truth in a way that I think is very entertaining for the audience. And he's helped me find truth. So, we've had quite a history together, and there's more to come. So
I absolutely love that, and I love doing a deep dive into research on everyone. And so I really enjoyed seeing, because I want to start sharing this journey of how we're getting to the show here, and it starts what some might consider a little darker place, but one of the things you've said in a previous interview, which I love, is magic is the joy that we can't explain. And it sounds like there was magic all about this. So let my listeners know what kind of started this whole journey into this play becoming what it is.
totally. Well, what happened was, my mother was sick for 8 years before she passed away. My mother got diagnosed with a brain disease in 2015, and Carol and I were extremely close, but we got even closer when my mom got sick. I was living in LA, my mom in Alabama, and Carol was very much a force that that kept me going. And it kept getting darker and darker. And when Carol died, it got the darkest, because the thing that I believed in, the thing that I could still see, Carol Cook, was gone. And I went on a bit of a West Hollywood bender, and I went into my playground, and it got even darker and darker and darker until about 2 weeks into this bender, I heard Carol, and I heard her say, "You got to keep going. You have to keep going." And I did. And that was the day that I decided that if I could clear some of this debris in my life, the first and biggest piece of debris for me being alcohol, if I could clear some of that debris, then perhaps I could find some safety and some peace. I didn't know I was going to find. I didn't know I was going to find such a colorful existence. I didn't know life was about to get so amazing. But it started to get better and better and better and better and better. And I trusted it, and I trusted it, and I listened to her, and I kept going. And about 3.5 months in, my mother passed away. And I'm so grateful that Carol woke me up when she did, because I got to be sober next to my mother when she died. And after my mom passed, I started to experience, as you said, all of these magical things, all of these awakenings, all of these spiritual moments that I had forgotten were inside of me. I lost those when my mom got sick, but I started believing again. And what happened was in January, this past January, I felt pulled to go to New York City, and I felt pulled by Carol. And I knew I was going there to tell my story in some capacity. I didn't even know it was going to be theatrical. I didn't know if it was going to be a book or a piece of art or something, but I knew something was pulling me to New York. And about 4 days in, I got the idea for this one-person show. And I thought that I was just going to talk about magic in the show. I thought that I was just going to talk about the light and the color. But I realized, in order for the audience to understand the magic and for it to be as bright as I see it, for them to see it as bright as I see it, I had to start with the darkness. The beginning of the story is when Carol Cook died for my sins. Now, I don't think that Carol Cook died for my sins, but in a way, I do believe she did, because she died and I woke up. And so it was the beginning. I go, well, let's just tell where that was. Let's start with the darkness. Let's start with the darkness. And if I can start with the darkness, and if I'm willing to get on stage and truthfully tell that part of the story truthfully, which can be difficult to do, then I have earned the magic. I have earned the trust of the audience so that I can deliver the light. I can deliver the sermon. But I got to start with the truth. And so I do. I can fully and wholly say that I do start with the darkness, and I tell the truth. And but that's what it makes it such a compelling story. Anytime you tell the truth, it's a compelling story. It doesn't matter what the truth is. If you tell the truth, you have a compelling story. It allows the audience to relate. It humanizes you. And for me, hopefully, we'll find out when I actually do the play in front of an audience, it lets the audience know that A, we're all connected, and B, hope is possible. Magic is possible. Miracles can happen, but it's up to you to allow them to happen.
I love that. And I love that you're calling it, I mean, the buzzword these days is what? Authenticity, right? Everyone's got to be authentic.
Sure.
But I think truth is what brings authenticity. I think truth is the real base and key there. So I love the way you're saying that, because I think that's where all authenticity comes from, is telling your truth, living your truth, right?
100%. And there is freedom in truth. I mean, they say the truth will set you free. There is such freedom in truth. And there's a freedom as an artist in truth. You cannot be false. The greatest art is the true story. That's where the greatest art comes from. The greatest art is controversial, but it's because you're telling the truth, and there are going to be all sorts of opinions surrounding that truth. And someone the other day said, they were bringing a group of people to the show, and they said, "Will anyone be offended? Want to make sure no one's offended." And I said, "Goodness, I hope someone's offended. If someone isn't offended, then I did something wrong." Because people get offended by truth. And then maybe they don't stay offended. Maybe they ask themselves, well, what is it that made me feel that way? And then it becomes a conversation. If we can take offense and turn it into a conversation, more truth bubbles up. And I hope that I start conversations. I'm certainly starting a conversation with myself. That's for sure. I mean, gosh, it's a one-man show. So if I'm not talking to a fictional character, I'm talking to myself. So I hope I start some truthful conversations, and we can rid ourselves of some of these stigmas that I label in this play.
Nice. And talk about this approach to writing. I mean, in 4 days, you're starting this entire thing, and you come from an acting background, right? So I'm sure you've written in the past, but how does writing kind of go against your acting? Did one inform the other, or how did that process work for you?
Sure. I've written other things. I've never written anything theatrical. I've written all sorts of poetry and things like that I'm very proud of. But I've never done anything theatrical. And I will say this, it came out of me not very easily, but very quickly, because it happened to me. And when I met with Cameron, I had been writing for about 4 months. And then we finally got to be in the same room together. And he said, lay it all out there, tell the truth, every bit of it. A lot of the things that I wrote down a ton, and a lot of the things that I wrote don't make it in the play, because you have to take this very, very large story and you have to, condense it. You have to tell the exact same story with every feeling and every color, but you have to condense it and get the same feelings across, in an amount of time that someone's willing to sit in a theater. But I will say that it was not easy, because I had to dig deep, and I had to go to places. I had to go to places I thought I had left. But the story wrote itself because it happened to me. All of it happened. And when I first got to New York, I thought I was going to be doing something with the good things that happened. No, I got to start with how it started. I got to start with, what did it look like when Carol died? What did that look like? And what did that feel like? And what did that lead to? What missteps did that lead to that actually turned out to be steps in the right direction? And if you're willing to tell the truth, there's no way around a good plot, because it happened.
Like we said, the film is a love letter to both Carol and to your mother, and for all love, there's friction, and you have to start with that and figure out what's from there. And if you're going to be honest, you have to talk about, you said, the good and the bad. And I think starting with that is a great cathartic way for yourself, I can imagine, as well, right? Did you feel
100%.
kind of yourself releasing all these feelings as you were writing them down?
There was a lot of shame that was released, and it was more, it was very, very cathartic, because it was forcing me, and not just forcing me, force seems to be a negative word. It was allowing me to go to these places, and it was allowing me to meet myself. And meeting yourself is the greatest challenge. Meeting yourself doesn't mean looking in the mirror and saying, "Hi, I'm Mason, if you know your name. Hi, I'm Mason." Meeting yourself is going to the place where you are. Going to the place where you are isn't always the brightest of places. Sometimes it's a very dark place, and I had to go meet myself. I had to go to that place, and I had to go get him. I had to go get him in that dark place and say, all right, we've done enough of that. So it was very, very cathartic, because it allowed me to look at myself as a whole, and to see every piece of me, and to label those pieces. And, the work isn't done. The work is never done. Hopefully the work is done when we get to the end of whatever this is. But it's a challenge to meet yourself every day. this play is meeting myself every day. Goodness. I mean, even today in rehearsal, I'm, trying to learn the lines, but also trying to be authentic, as you said. And you have to meet yourself. You clamp up because of the fear, and you have to say, no, get out of here. I've got this. So quite cathartic to a long-winded answer to your question.
That's okay. Was there anything surprising you learned about yourself during the process? Anything that you thought, oh, I have a handle on myself pretty well? It's like, oh, maybe I didn't know about that part of me.
The biggest thing was, I love that question. Thank you for asking that. The biggest thing that I learned is that a lot of the fear that I held on to, even fear as I'm writing the play, isn't real. A lot of these things that I'm writing down and happened weren't real. For 8 years, I was in a very, very dark place, and I was spiraling about my mother's sickness. How was it going to look at the end? What was it going to manifest into? And those things never happened. It was a very long 8 years that she was sick, and it was a very difficult 8 years. But those fears that I had created never happened. That's probably the greatest thing that I have learned thus far in this process, is that fear isn't real. I think that a certain amount of fear is very healthy because it reminds you that that what you're doing is important. Right. It reminds you that it's important because there is risk involved. And the stakes are high, but the majority of these things that we fear never happen. It is far more likely for something wonderful to happen than it is for something bad to happen.
Well said. And so now you've gone through the production process where you're writing this and you're talking with Cameron, you're blocking it, and now you're in rehearsal and you're acting again. Do you find yourself drawn more to one side or the other when you think this is over? It's like, wow, I really enjoyed the behind the scenes process more, writing, producing, or did you really find out that you really missed the acting portion? What's kind of loving right now?
Yeah, I'm loving the acting. Now that we've been doing all this work, it's so much work. You have to have a little bit of a lot of delusion to do something like this, because if I had known how hard it would be, I would have scared myself and I would have backed out. Too late now. I'm finally at a place where I get to act, and it's been a long time, and it feels so good. It feels so good to act, and it feels so good to do something that's that's truthful. I think let's get through this first, but I think that there's more writing in the future. I would love to continue writing. It has been very freeing, and I've learned a great deal. So I think both, but now that the foundation has been laid, it's really comforting to start to get into the acting again. It's feeling like home.
I love that. And so you started hearing Carol's voice that motivated you to do this and going towards that. Are you hearing your mom or Carol these days as it gets closer to completion? Are you hearing?
Oh, you have no idea. You have no idea. Every day I'm hearing both of them very, very loudly. I'm hearing Carol especially loud as I'm doing the play, because the theater was Carol's sanctuary, and Carol, much like her mentor, Lucille Ball, was all about the work. Carol was studied. She studied and studied and studied. Even if she was just doing one number for the stage benefit to raise money for AIDS, she was studying for weeks up to the performance. She would get to the theater hours early to prepare. And I've never done anything like this before. And I am hearing her say, do the work. She's saying, do the work. And she's saying, don't get ahead of yourself. And I'm trying to listen to her. So I'm very much hearing her. I was hearing my mom more as I was writing it. It was kind of easier to tap into my mother, the maternal side that's going to love you no matter what. And Carol loved me no matter what, but she was about the work. She was about the work, and she didn't play around. She told me, I love this story. She said there was one time, and it only happened once when she was younger in her career. She was doing a play, and I don't remember what the play was, but she walked out on stage for the first performance in front of an audience, and she realized, I'm going to jinx myself. She realized she hadn't done her homework. She hadn't prepared as much as she should have, and she said, "I'll never do that again." So I'm trying to prepare as much as possible.
I love that. Well, I think it's going to be a huge success. Talk about the last couple of years of Carol's life. I mean, I've heard so much about her. Her husband I never met. I met Carol very briefly one time through the Sort of Lives family. I never met her, but her husband's supposed to be just a hoot and a half, and just great stories as well. You were working
Yes.
on a Carol and Tom project. Talk about that, and what stories did that bring up? That had to be
Yes, well, I was working for a very long time. I was working on a documentary on both Carol and Tom, and it was a documentary that it's funny because I'm actually kind of reviving some of that footage as I promote the play. You'll see some of that on Instagram, and I would like to finish that piece one day. It hit a point where I was too in it. I couldn't creatively remove myself from the situation, and there was too much going on with my mother and with Carol and with COVID. And I put the documentary on pause, but I have all of the footage. I have gorgeous footage. I have Del Shores speaking about both Carol and Tom. I've got Bruce Valanche talking. I've got Robert Osborne, their dear friend, speaking. I've got David Galligan, Carol's beloved director that directed her for years and years and years, and Tom. And I've got footage of Carol and Tom. And it was the reason I wanted to do that documentary is because I don't believe that Carol and Tom ever really got the notoriety and the acclaim that they deserved. I still don't believe it. They were brilliant actors. And I am so glad that I spent all that time filming that documentary because I wanted to capture who they were as individuals. As I say this in the play, Carol had a very large following due to her association with Lucille Ball. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful frame of reference. Lucy discovered her in the late 50s, put her under contract at Desilu. And that was awesome. I was never drawn to Carol because of Lucille Ball. I was drawn to Carol because of Carol, and I was always saying, my favorite thing was to share Carol and Tom with my friends, whether it be at a birthday party or at a dinner. They were and are so unique and so special. And I always felt that Carol Cook was the last of her kind. I always felt that Carol was sort of the young kid when old Hollywood was Hollywood. And the stories that she told of her friends, Ethel Merman and Lucille Ball, and I was fascinated. I was fascinated by that.
And it was a true love story between the two of them too. I mean, I heard the love was
Say it again?
epic. And it was a true love story between the two of them too. I mean, I heard the love was just epic.
Quite a love story between Carol Cook and Tom Troop. And it's funny because, Tom is a brilliant actor. He's a brilliant dramatic actor. And Carol was a brilliant dramatic actor too. Now, I don't know if people saw her drama, but she was this larger than life, colorful comedian. And the two complemented each other so much. And they both wanted such good things for each other. Carol said that whenever the phone rang, she hoped it was Tom's agent. She's like, God, I hope it's something for Tom. And Tom felt the same way. He really did. And that's why I think it was such a beautiful love story. They had such a devotion to each other. There was never, ever, ever not a rose next to Carol's bed. Tom always made sure there was a vase and a rose, even when we traveled. I mean, there were times where I was with them in New York and in Palm Springs and in San Francisco and in Dallas, and there was always a rose next to Carol's bed. They had such... They had just had such devotion to each other, and they celebrated each other. That was the best part. They were always egging each other on at dinner parties saying, tell that story that you tell so well, tell that joke, or what about the time that They were so wonderful. They were the best comedy team because they set each other up. They knew exactly Tom knew exactly how to set Carol up for a brilliant story. And Carol did the same thing with Tom. And it was such a beautiful romance because they lifted each other. It was always about lifting each other. Right. And just such an example of devotion, That alone, to witness that, was such a privilege. Thank you for asking about that. That was a privilege.
speaking of devotion, I mean, Mason McCauley, you are devoted to this fantastic story. I wish you all the luck in it.
Thank
I
you.
have lots of friends going to see it. I wish I could be there
Oh,
in
good.
person, but yeah.
Well, one day you'll see it. One day I'll take it somewhere closer to you, and you'll see it.
I'm looking forward to that. I will go to New York. I will go to any place else. We'll get there. But
Okay.
the play is called Carol Cook Died for My Sins. It's playing October 20th through November 10th at the Skylight Theater in Los Angeles. So congratulations, my new friend. I just
Thank
I'm so
you.
excited for you. I mean, this is just a great new adventure for you.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to me. You know, Del Shores is the reason that I'm here talking to you, and he said I have to talk to you, and I thank you for making that work out. Truly.
Well, it's my pleasure, my friend. I'm glad to get to know you. We'll be talking many times in the future, I'm sure. Stay
I
on the
hope
line
so.
for me, Mason. Guys, we're going to go ahead and have a 5 question of the Mason next week, so be sure to look for that. If you are in the LA area, look for tickets for the Skylight Theater. It's going to be a fantastic show. Again, October 20th through November 10th. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Left of Straight Show interviews right here in the Left of Straight Podcast Network.
Thanks for listening to The Left of Straight Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media, and be sure to check out our website for contests and other news and information. See you next week.